As Walt said, the gospel is rich and appropriate, but I think all three of the scriptures that we heard and celebrated and sang this evening give us three very clear reasons to be hopeful as together we reflect on the human condition of addictions. First, Paul speaks very openly about his experience of weakness. And not only that, he brags about it as a source of strength. Secondly, Jesus makes the invitation to each one of us to partner with him and let him share in carrying our burden. And thirdly, the Lord is kind and merciful all the time. I think to speak of healing from addictions, it's natural to make use of the metaphor of a journey from sickness to health, from darkness to light, from desperation to hope, from confinement to freedom. The poet Mary Oliver has a poem in which she writes about journey, and she describes the experience of one who is beset with many voices that hound her. In reaching a turning point, she writes like this. She says this: "But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save." She almost speaks the language of recovery. Relating Mary Oliver's words to the journey of recovery, we need to understand rightly the word determined or determination as she uses it in her poem. This determination is not the self-sufficient determination of a Lone Ranger or a tough guy, but rather a determined admission of defeat, a surrender, which sets me on the new path of healing and recovery from addiction. But let me back up. In preparation for tonight, I was kind of doing a stroll down memory lane, reviewing how was it that I got here. And I remembered an experience at the start of my wonderful journey called recovery, which today strikes me as both humorous and important. By 2006, I found that I had a little trouble with alcohol. That's one of the things about alcoholics like me. We dress up the details. I had a little trouble with alcohol. My trouble had been building gradually. On a particular fall day, a group of friends, my co-workers and community members, got together and called a meeting. They invited me and proceeded to tell me how much they cared for me. They told me how they wanted to help me get out of my little trouble with alcohol. They offered me a kind of dream vacation, a one-way trip to a treatment center. Of course, they gave me the right to accept or reject the gift. Thankfully, God's grace had already begun to work a miracle in me, and yes, I accepted the gift. Now, I had a couple of days to tie up loose ends, cancel appointments, cancel meetings, pack, and get on a plane. One of the things I did was I called my sisters and I notified some of my friends that I would be taking some time off. Finally, settled into my new home, one day I received a card from a friend in which he wrote this: "Sorry to hear of your addiction. You're in my prayers." Well, when I read that, two things happened to me. First, tears came to my eyes. And secondly, anger lit up inside me with the reaction, "What does he think I am, for God's sake?" Webster defines addiction as a compulsive physiological need for a habit-forming drug. The spiritual writer Gerald May, in his book Addiction and Grace, says it this way: "Addiction is a state of compulsion, obsession, or preoccupation that enslaves a person's will and desire. Addiction sidetracks and eclipses the energy of our deepest, truest desire for love and goodness." That's an important insight. Addiction takes hold of my deepest and most holy desire for goodness and love and misdirects it to bad ends. My friend was right. I was dealing with an addiction, even if I didn't like that term. My addiction was alcoholism. And I was starting on a path toward healing and hope. My life had become a place of darkness and dissatisfaction. I was unhappy. I was, as we say, restless, irritable, and discontented most of the time. I was my problem, but I kept blaming everyone and everything outside of myself for my problems. I used and abused alcohol to numb the pain. I found myself drinking on a daily basis, and I isolated myself. I was showing up and doing my job, trying to wear a smile, while inside I was hurting. Those closest to me saw it plainly and clearly. I, however, denied it. Thankfully, my friends reached out to me. In offering me a way out, the one thing I had to do to save my life was admit defeat, surrender to the help of others and to God. Wasn't easy for somebody who thought I had to do it all on my own. That's why I kept responding to people, "I'm fine, thanks." No, I wasn't. Rather than focus on the darkness and pain of addiction, I think we are called to reflect on healing and hope. So I would like to share with you the grace and the healing and hope which I have found in the spirituality of the 12 steps. 80 years ago, this summer, two men working together to help each other began to share their experience, strength, and hope with each other. And this working and sharing gradually resulted in the writing down of a vision of a way out from the pit of alcoholism. They articulated what came to be known as the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And these 12 steps subsequently have been applied to a wide variety of addictions and recovery programs. The common element in all of them is this: Recovery is a process. Recovery is a spiritual program for living in which stopping drinking or using is but the beginning. I think the basic dimensions of the spirituality of recovery can be stated simply like this. I admit my powerlessness. I come to believe that God can help me, and I decide to surrender to God's love and care for me. Normal people do that spontaneously. Addicts don't. We fight it. I admit my powerlessness. I come to believe that God can help me, and I decide to surrender, to let go, turn my life over to God's love and care for me. The prayer that accompanies the third step in the 12 steps says this. It's a beautiful prayer. God, I offer myself to you, to build with me and to do with me as you will. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. May I do your will always. That prayer has become one of my morning prayers, and I try not to start a day without sitting down, taking a deep breath, and praying that prayer. Surrendering is an essential and powerful experience of conversion in which I turn away from pretending that I am in charge and playing God to turning myself over to the care of God and asking God to help me live rightly and generously in this world. It's a move away from selfishness and self-pity toward humility and loving kindness. We don't do this on our own. God and others help us to get our lives back. For most of us in addiction, our relationships have suffered terribly, and we isolated ourselves. The 12-step programs of recovery help us to begin once again to socialize, to reach out to others who also know what it is like to start over. Regular meetings with other men and women in recovery is a safe place to be honest about who I really am and to reach out for help, as well as to give help and support to others. Together in recovery groups, we begin to understand and to be able to say with St. Paul, as he said in the reading tonight, "When I am weak, then I am strong." The spirituality of recovery continues to unfold as I examine my life during my active addiction. And that's a mess. I begin to face up to the mess I have made and the people I have hurt. I seek God's help so that I can take responsibility for my actions and acknowledge that my addictive living has hurt both myself and others. I talk with other people. I talk with another person in a special way about what I discover through my self-examination. The person in recovery comes to discover something that Catholics have known for a long time. There is growth and grace in confession. It's good for us. As I continue to face up to my defects and my weaknesses, I come to rely ever more strongly on God's grace and love. I am learning a new way of living, leaning on the Lord. The spirituality of recovery leads me to develop a relationship with God and to build a prayer life, something you might not think of when you think of the addicts you know. Yet this is the greatest gift of recovery, a real relationship with God which is simple, honest, practical, and daily. The 12 steps remind us that we only have a daily reprieve from the pain of our sickness if we maintain our spiritual fitness. This makes it absolutely essential that we daily examine our behaviors and acknowledge when we have hurt someone else. We take responsibility for our actions, and we make amends when necessary. Our new relationship with God, our spirituality, is real and incarnational. There can be no separation between how I am with God and how I am with the women and men I meet every day. And so I develop a daily practice of taking stock of my living, and I try to repair the damages I cause, not sometime in a distant future, but as soon as I can. A recovery friend of mine said recently at a meeting, "We're retraining our brains." That's true, but we're also learning new skills. Addicts mostly have made a mess of very important human relationships: spouses, children, siblings, parents, community members, friends, and co-workers. The 12 steps help us to rebuild a life of honest and humble relationships with self, with others, and with God. The 12 steps help us to move from thinking of myself first all the time and what I can get out of today to thinking of others first and asking myself, what can I do for someone else today, especially someone still suffering in addiction? Recovery from addiction leads us back to healing and hope. It's a wonderful experience. It's a resurrection. The teaching of Jesus in tonight's gospel was, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." Not too long ago, my colleague at King's House, Father Mark, pointed out something important about this image, the yoke. Take my yoke upon you. And he reminded us that this is not a reference to some cumbersome collar meant to constrict or burden a beast of burden, but rather the yoke that Jesus offers us is meant to join us to him. This yoke is meant to join two animals side by side to lighten the load in working together. And so as Jesus invites us to take his yoke upon us, he is inviting us into a partnership to join him, working together side by side, sharing the load, but mostly trusting in his grace and his power and his mercy. It is possible to recover from addiction and to rediscover healing and hope. This is so because the Lord is kind and merciful. The 12 steps introduce us to a spirituality which becomes the foundation of a new life of freedom. In this new life, I get to live once again as God's beloved son or daughter. And I get to discover the joys in giving to others what has been so freely given to me. So in concluding, I would just say that if you or any of your loved ones are suffering due to addiction, I would suggest that you consider coming to the open meeting that takes place here at the shrine every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock in the Visitor Center. There's a room full of people who would be most happy to welcome you and to introduce you to a bunch of walking miracles who have recovered from the desperate state of active addiction. You would be most welcome.